Hello, and welcome to Tracy Momi Reads. Today, I am back with another book review, and I'm going to be talking about Mrs. Wiggins by Mary Monroe. Mrs. Wiggins, Mary Monroe. Now, I will start this video off by saying, I know in the past that, I've been kind of bad sometimes about spoilers, but I always put notifications. And there's just, about this book, I know that there's going to be a spoiler or two dropped. So just know that I'll try to be as vague as possible, but it's going to be almost impossible for me to really talk about this book without kind of giving away a little bit. This book was on my list, but like I talked about in another video, I don't necessarily have a checklist. Okay, this month I'm reading this month I'm reading that. It's kind of as the mood strikes me. I'll look at my list, because that is one thing I'm trying to be better about, is getting to books that are on my list. And this one was on Kindle Unlimited, and I was like, well, you know what? It seemed like it was short. I've heard that it was a quick read. Let me go ahead and see if I can get into it. And initially, because I didn't know, like I heard stuff about it, but mainly people were just like, oh my God, that ending. Oh my God, this book is crazy. I didn't hear a lot of detailed information regarding like the setting or anything like that. And so when I first started reading it and it was set in 1917, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do anything with this, because, I've talked about this before too. I don't necessarily care for period pieces, so I started reading, and you could tell right out the gate, just with the style of writing and the the narration, that this was going to be something kind of campy. I figured it wasn't going to be too deep with, what was going on in 1917 with regards to racial strife and all that kind of stuff. I just didn't want to read any books like that. And there was, in there, a little bit of that in there, because how can you avoid what the landscape of America was like if you're writing a story like that in America? But that totally was not the focus of the book. Oh my God, it started off crazy. And within the first chapter, you already learned that, okay, this is going to be a little wild. So, spoiler coming up, but from the first chapter, it already says this. But so you have this couple, Maggie and Hubert, right? They've been friends since they were, like kids. And turns out Hubert is gay, and Maggie's had a horrible upbringing and had some bad stuff happen to her. And they are both just very gun shy about relationships. And he's not gun shy. He just, he can't be his true self, given the fact that his father is a preacher, and it's 1917, and he's a black man and all that stuff. So the two of them decide they're going to get married so that they can kind of be a cover for each other. She doesn't want to get involved or entangled with anyone, and then he wants to have this life outside of what's normal, but they're putting on this facade for their respective families. And Maggie is trying to overcome her situation because her parents left a lot to be desired with regards to reputation and all that stuff. So it's like the sins of the father, like people are looking at her a certain way because of who her parents are or were. And so they feel like this getting married is the thing to do to just please everybody, except themselves, of course. And so that's how the whole story starts off, built on a lie, right? And what happens next after people get married? It's like, well, when are you having kids? And so they were both repulsed at the idea of procreating together. So, oh my God. So that's when it all starts. They go on this quest to try to find somebody to impregnate Maggie, and it just kept getting, more and more. It's like you have to keep up with all these lies and this life that you've built, and you've done so much to maintain the lie and the facade that you will do anything to make sure that it doesn't unravel, and you are not going to allow anyone to do anything to jeopardize this big lie that you've built. And therein lies the meat of the story and the depths at which Maggie will go to protect this house of cards, this house of lies that she's built. It was very fast paced, very quick. Again, the narration and the writing style was very matter of fact, kind of to the point. There's not a whole lot of like imagery and poetic words and things like that. And I've heard a lot of people. There were a lot of people who really enjoyed this story, and I enjoyed it. I found it to be entertaining, which is at the end of the day probably what the author was intending. But this was my first book by her, by Mary Monroe. I've never read any of her previous books, and I guess people who had read previous books or that were fans of her writing, I guess this was a big deviation from her prior stories. And there were a lot of people who didn't like it because they felt it was just like too simplistic, too unbelievable, or too much, I guess. But I mean, yeah, there were some parts of it that were maybe implausible, but it's a fiction story. Like, that is the whole thing, that escapism, and to take you out of the norm and go totally left with what could happen. That I think with authors, you're kind of given creative license to do that. I mean, that's why the majority of people read fiction books, fantasy books, because it's stuff that wouldn't happen in real life. I mean, it could. I'm not saying this couldn't happen. For all we know, it could have happened. Maybe a great grandmother or somebody told her about a story about a woman. I mean, because back then in 1917, I would venture to say that law enforcement probably wasn't really caring about what was going on in black communities. You step outside of that and start trying to do something in a white community, well, yeah, but you probably could have got away with a whole lot of stuff in a black community unless you were thriving, and someone didn't like that and they came along to try to take something away. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, that the thing that got me was the last chapter. I mean, it's like the writing was kind of on the wall, but I really thought that, it was gonna go. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, she's gonna, because he's saying, and, then all of a sudden, it just went a whole different direction. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, you talk about karma coming back in spades. My only issue with the way that it ended, I mean, it was a surprise, and like I said, I didn't see that part of the thing coming. But the very end, I will just say this, and this may be spoilerish as well, even though I haven't told you Maggie's sins, but I felt like in the very end, I feel like she kind of got off too easy with how things ended for her. You know what I'm saying? It's like she should have had to, bear the consequences and I don't know if grief is the right word, but and understanding that everything that you're experiencing and what happened, the horrible thing that happened, you started this whole thing. And it was because of you that you ended up losing something. So, yeah, I was kind of like, really? She's just going to get off like that? But it was just really, and even though the book, fiction book, and it went to extremes in a lot of places, I think that there are people who will go to extremes to kind of keep up a facade, you know, and because they're so concerned about what people are thinking about them, pleasing other people, and just coming across a certain way for fear of rejection or, you know, not being accepted for who they are. And it was wild. It was wild. And if you're looking for something that will, you know, that's fast paced, that kind of goes off the rails in some parts, and you're not looking for something that where you want all the pieces to be tied neatly together and explanations and there's no way she could have and this would have happened. If you're not looking for all the logic that you know, stories that some of the stories maybe that you've read may contain, if you're just wanting some campy, kind of fast, kind of, yeah, she's getting away with it, yeah, there's not going to be a consequence, Mrs. Wiggins by Mary Monroe, this is going to be your story. It's so many issues too that are dealt with in the story. When you talk about, you know, I mean, out the gate, you have like this gay man, you know, and his whole lifestyle and being in the closet. Then this woman who was abused as a child. Then there is some race and class stuff when she goes to work for this very wealthy white lady. She goes to work for her. Then there's some domestic abuse that happens with her best friend and her neighbor. You know, there's just so much going on in this little story that's not even like the meat of the story of what's really happening. So if that sounds like your jam, then I think you will really enjoy Mrs. Wiggins. But again, you know, you just got to kind of go into it knowing that the implausible is plausible, and it's going to happen in this book. And it's not a book where you could expect for anything to really make sense or understand, because for initially I was like, you know, thinking, well, why didn't she go? Why didn't she tell? Why didn't she say? Because it's a fiction book, and this is how this author chose to present her story. Everything doesn't have to follow a certain formula, and I think that's what made this book, you know, entertaining and made it a good read, because the author did. She just took her creative liberties and she ran wild with them. So anyway, I really enjoyed it. It's so funny because initially when I saw this cover, I mean, at a glance, I don't know if you all can see with the glare or whatever, she kind of looks like Angela Bassett. I was like, oh, is that Angela Bassett on the cover? But I don't know if they made this into a movie. First of all, I don't even know how that will play out. It's crazy. It's a lot going on, but I don't know. I'm trying to think at the end of the book, I think they were just in their 40s. I mean, Angela Bassett looks good, so she probably could pull it off. But yeah, and this picture also gave me a false impression. I thought this book was totally about like church people or something to do with the church, and because I think Mary Monroe, some of her books are like that, or maybe that's what she writes about, and that could have been maybe the gripe that some of her you know, fans of her work had. But yeah, it totally, I mean, there was a church element because Hubert's dad was a preacher, but it totally wasn't rooted in or focused on like the church or any religious sect or anything like that. So anyway, I enjoyed the book. I say check it out. You know, expand your palette, your reading palette, and your horizons. Try something different, something new, and go in without any expectations. And I think you might be pleasantly surprised. Anyway, if you've read Mrs. Wiggins, I'd love to hear what you thought about it. You know, leave me a comment below, and make sure that you like this video and subscribe to my channel. I got some analytics that were telling me that like 97% of the people that are watching my videos are not subscribed to my channel. How? Why? Click subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming up next. You guys have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.